I wasn't someone who made dumb choices for fun. I was the type to pack extra water on hikes, read campground reviews for hours before a trip, and check the weather 5 times in a day. But in September 2013, I made a decision that still sits in my bones like a chill. I camped in a graveyard. I was 32 at the time, living in a rented 2-bedroom flat in Derby, England. I was working nights in a packaging warehouse, stocking boxes and loading pallets until sunrise. My days were mostly empty. That month I had taken a week off. I didn't have the money to fly anywhere or even go far, so I started looking for places within a 2-hour drive where I could camp alone and reset my mind. I found Graveyard Ridge on an old hiking forum post. It wasn't the actual name, just what people called it. According to the thread, it was a narrow strip of land with a 19th century graveyard sitting at the top of a wooded hill. There were only a few gravestones left standing. Most had fallen, been stolen, or crumbled into mossy rubble. The spot wasn't even listed on any local hiking maps, but some users talked about camping near it. They said it was isolated, quiet, no tourists. One guy even posted a grainy picture of his tent pitched beside a row of leaning headstones. That image stuck with me. It wasn't morbid curiosity or thrill-seeking that made me choose that place. I just wanted to be alone somewhere I wouldn't see another soul. I packed my small green backpack, one-man tent, sleeping bag, thermal mat, small camping stove, a tin of beans, biscuits, some bread, a liter of water, my old Nokia phone, and a torch with fresh batteries. I didn't plan to stay more than one night. It was just a one-off experience. I told no one where I was going. The drive out took a bit over 90 minutes. I passed through narrow Derbyshire lanes lined with dry stone walls, the kind that seemed to stretch across the landscape like veins. When I finally parked, it was in a gravel pull-off near a rusted gate. The rest of the way I walked, using my printed map and a few screenshots from the forum. It was about a 40-minute hike to reach the ridge. The trail wasn't marked, just a series of fading footpaths through overgrowth. The deeper I got, the less I heard. No cars, no farm machinery. Even the wind seemed to avoid that place. When I first saw the gravestones through the trees, I hesitated. They weren't grand or dramatic. They were hunched like old men, covered in lichen and shadow. Most were unreadable, their letters eroded into soft swirls. A low stone wall wrapped around the area, broken in parts by tree roots and time. Beyond it was just forest and sky. I set up camp just past the graveyard, about 20 meters from the edge of the stones. The ground there was flat and covered in dry grass. I cleared a patch, pitched my tent, and sat with my back against the wall, watching the trees sway in slow, wide movements. The first hour or so passed quietly. I ate a bit, walked around the graves, not stepping on any of them out of respect. A few had rusted metal crosses sticking out of the dirt. One had a stone angel with its face chipped off. There was no noise. No birds, no bugs. Just trees shifting and leaves touching the earth. I tried reading but couldn't concentrate. The quiet was too full. I lay back on my mat and closed my eyes around 5. It was still light out, but I wanted to rest before dark. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes, the trees had turned black silhouettes. The air felt cooler. I looked at my watch. 7:43 p.m. I got up and lit my torch, ate some biscuits and beans, sat for a while listening. Still nothing. I started to feel something I hadn't expected. Not fear exactly, but a creeping alertness. Every sound seemed too close. The crack of a twig made me look over my shoulder. A flutter of leaves made my skin tighten. I kept telling myself it was just the isolation, but the silence felt unnatural. Around 9, I crawled into my tent and zipped it shut. I left the torch on beside me. It cast a soft circle of light on the thin green nylon. I tried to read again, gave up, lay staring at the tent wall. Then I heard it. Not loud, not even clear, just movement. Soft, deliberate steps on grass. I froze, held my breath. They stopped too. I waited. Nothing. I thought animal. A fox. Maybe a badger. But the steps had been too steady, too slow. I stayed still. My hand hovered over the torch. I turned it off. Sat in the dark for what felt like an hour. Then it started again. One step. Paused. Another. Then nothing. Then a thud. It sounded like something had dropped on the other side of the stone wall. I sat up fast, nearly hitting my head on the tent roof. I pressed my ear to the fabric. Silence. Then the smallest scrape, like fingers on bark. My chest felt tight. I tried to breathe quietly. I was suddenly aware of how thin the tent was. It would hide nothing, offer no protection. The next sound was a snap, wood breaking. A branch maybe, then 2 more steps. I could hear them now. Slow, deliberate. They stopped just outside the tent. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The hair on my arms stood up. Then the sound of something brushing the fabric. Light, just a touch. Then silence. I stayed like that for at least 20 minutes. Eventually, I turned the torch back on. Shaking, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. Nothing. I waited again, then stepped outside. The air was sharp and cold. The moon was barely out behind the clouds. I walked the perimeter of my camp, torch in hand, shone it across the graves. Nothing moved. But then I saw something that made my skin crawl. One of the gravestones, the angel, was flat on the ground. I'd seen it earlier, standing. It wasn't wind or time. It had been pushed. I felt something snap in me then. I wasn't going to make it till morning. I started packing fast. Just shoved things into my bag. Rolled up the mat without care. Left the tin of beans half open in the dirt. Torch in one hand, bag slung over my back. I set off down the hill. I moved quickly, not running but fast enough that my legs started to burn. The trees pressed in. My torch flickered once. I shook it. It steadied. About halfway down, I heard a sound behind me. Not loud, but close. Leaves shifting. Footfall. I turned and shone the light. No one. I kept going. Faster. A second sound. Closer. Then I saw it. Just for a second between trees. A figure. Human. Thin. Standing still. Too still. I didn't wait. I ran. Tripped once, caught myself, kept going. My lungs burned. When I finally saw the gate again, I nearly cried. I sprinted to the car, keys already in hand. Fumbled. Dropped them. Picked them up with shaking fingers. Started the engine. The headlights came on and I saw the trail behind me. Empty. I drove fast. Didn't stop until I was back in Derby. Parked outside my flat. Locked the car twice. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. The next morning, I checked the hiking forum again. The post about Graveyard Ridge was gone. Deleted. The user who posted it, no longer active. I never reported it. What would I say? I wasn't harmed. I had no proof. But I know what I heard, what I saw, and I never went camping alone again. I never liked camping around other people. I used to drive hours just to avoid the crowds. Families with screaming kids, weekend drinkers, couples blasting Bluetooth speakers. That wasn't camping to me. I wanted real quiet, the kind that presses against your eardrums. I was 36 in 2016 and had just quit a warehouse job in Spokane. Burnt out, sick of people, tired of the clock. My plan was to spend 2 weeks alone in the woods near a lake I'd found on an old Forest Service map. It wasn't even labeled on most GPS apps. A tiny dent in northern Idaho, about 3 hours east of Coeur d'Alene, close to the Montana border. No real name, no signs, just coordinates and a few winding forest roads to get there. The truck barely made it through the last 5 miles. Dirt had turned to rock, potholes deep enough to sink a tire. I left the truck off a bend and hiked the rest. I had a cheap pack, a small tent, my .38 revolver, more for bears than anything else, and enough food to last 12 days if I stretched it. By the second day, I'd set up camp 50 yards from the lake. Crystal clear water, untouched shoreline, no garbage, no fire pits, nothing that said, someone was here. I figured nobody knew about it but me. The days passed quietly. I read, I fished. I took long naps on a foam mat under tall pines. I bathed in the lake, cooked simple meals, and tried to let my mind slow down. No cell reception, no human voices. Just wind through the trees, water lapping against the shore, the occasional hawk overhead. But on the 5th night, something changed. It was just after midnight. I'd gone to sleep early, right after dinner. I woke up needing to piss. I unzipped the tent, stepped outside barefoot, and walked a few feet toward the edge of the trees. The moon was barely a sliver. No flashlight, just letting my eyes adjust. As I stood there, something caught in my peripheral vision. A flicker of light. Not firelight, not a flashlight. It looked like a reflection. Something glassy catching the moon. I froze. I stared into the trees. Nothing. Just dark trunks and the faint outline of branches. I listened. Not a single sound, no insects, no wind, not even the usual frogs by the water. I stood still for a full minute. Then I walked slowly back to the tent, grabbed my revolver, and sat just inside the flap. I waited, my ears strained. I didn't move until sunrise. When morning came, I searched the woods for over an hour. Nothing. No footprints, no broken branches. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the moon caught on some dew-covered branch. Still, I kept the revolver within reach from then on. By the 8th day, I was on edge. I hadn't seen anything else, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. A few times I'd find small changes around camp. A stick moved, a rock where there hadn't been one. Once, my pack was zipped differently than I'd left it. I figured maybe I was being careless, maybe animals. But then, on the 9th night, I saw him. It was cold. I'd stayed up late, sitting by a small fire I'd made in a pit of rocks. No real wind, just that damp chill that creeps in from the lake. I was about to put out the fire when I looked up. There was a man standing at the edge of the trees. I could just barely make him out. A thin figure, maybe 6 feet tall, wearing a light jacket, jeans. He wasn't holding a flashlight.
No had lamp.
He was holding something in his hand. A drinking glass. Just a regular kitchen glass, clear as day. The moon caught the edge of it again. That same glint I'd seen before. He didn't move. He just stood there, half hidden behind a trunk, watching me. I didn't say a word, didn't shout or ask who he was. I just sat frozen, staring back. My revolver was next to me in the dirt, a foot from my hand. After maybe 15 seconds, he turned and walked into the woods. Not fast, just slow, like he wasn't in a rush. I grabbed the gun and stood up, walked to where I'd seen him. There were no sounds.
No footsteps.
I didn't follow him. Instead, I packed everything I could into my pack, dumped the rest into the lake. Food, trash, anything that could leave a scent or sign, and hiked out in the dark. I didn't go back to the truck. I didn't want to be on the road. I walked in the opposite direction, deeper into the forest, for hours. I had my compass. I figured I'd find another trailhead or a road eventually. I hiked for 2 days straight, ate barely anything, slept only in daylight, curled in thick brush with the revolver under my chest. I listened for footsteps every waking moment. On the 3rd morning, I found an old fire road and followed it until a ranger truck passed. I waved it down. Told them I'd gotten lost on a solo trip and was out of food. They gave me water and drove me to a town called Troy, Montana. I didn't say anything about the man, not to the ranger, not to the woman at the gas station who let me use the phone. I just called my brother, had him wire me some money, and caught a bus back to Spokane. I've never camped alone since. I don't even like driving near the Idaho border anymore. What still gets to me is the glass. That's what makes it stick in my mind. He wasn't carrying a flashlight or a weapon or even something you'd expect from someone way out in the woods. He had a glass. Just one empty glass. Why? Why bring that into the forest, to the middle of nowhere? Was he living out there, watching? Was it a signal? A habit? Sometimes I think he didn't expect me to see him. Other times I think he wanted me to. Maybe he brought the glass just to see if the moon would catch it again, to see if I'd notice, to see what I'd do. I was 39 when I took that solo trip out to Wyoming, back in late September of 2022. I'd gotten used to hiking and camping alone the last few years, especially after my divorce finalized. I didn't have kids, and my work allowed me to take time off in blocks. That year, I planned a 2-week trip split between Utah and Wyoming, mostly on foot. I carried a weatherproof backpack, a military surplus tent, and enough dehydrated food and instant coffee to last me more than 2 weeks. I liked the quiet. I liked the cold. I'd hiked through the Bridger Wilderness before, but this time I aimed to go off the more popular trails. Most people stuck to the Green River Lakes or Titcomb Basin areas. I'd planned a route near New Fork Lake, then east towards Soda Lake, hoping to make a wide circle and end back near Boulder, Wyoming. My goal was solitude, and I got it. It started off like most of my trips. Cold mornings, clear skies. The air was sharp, clean. Nights got dark quickly, and once the sun dipped, temperatures dropped hard. My second night, I camped in a flat meadow just past a dry wash. I remember how quiet it got, the kind of quiet where you can hear your heartbeat if you're lying still. I slept fine, though I woke up once when something, maybe a deer, crunched through the brush nearby. The third night, I made camp near a small stream, maybe 4 feet wide, shallow but steady flowing. Water was clear, cold, and perfect for filtering. I set up about 40 yards from the stream in a stand of scattered pines. The spot seemed perfect. No signs of other people, flat ground, and sheltered from the wind. I made a small dinner of rice and freeze-dried beef, watched the sun drop behind the hills, and crawled into my sleeping bag before it got too cold. That was the first night I didn't sleep well. I couldn't explain it, no sounds woke me. Nothing touched the tent. But I woke up at least 5 times, sweating despite the cold. I'd unzip the bag, sit up, stare at the black inside of the tent. I'd hold my breath and listen. But all I ever heard was the faint gurgle of the stream and the occasional snap of a twig in the woods. Normal forest sounds. Nothing that should have made me nervous. But I was. Something about the place itched at the back of my head. The next morning I boiled coffee, shook off the weird feeling, and kept moving. I didn't even make breakfast, just poured some hot water into a pouch of oatmeal, packed up, and left. Around midday, I realized I'd left my multi-tool at the stream. I always kept it clipped to my belt or stowed in the outer mesh of my backpack. That day, it was nowhere to be found. I remembered setting it next to the water bag while filtering. Must have forgotten to grab it. I had other tools, a small knife, cord, a spare lighter, but that multi-tool had been with me for years. I decided to backtrack. It would only cost me a couple of hours, and I didn't want to lose it. I reached the stream before 4 p.m. The sun was already dipping low, throwing long shadows across the trees. Everything looked the same at first, same flat ground, same quiet trees, but when I approached the spot where I thought I'd filtered water, I felt it again. that unease, like something was just wrong, not out of place, not dangerous, just wrong. Like when you walk into your house and instantly know someone's been inside, even though everything looks normal. I found the multi-tool. It was right where I'd guessed, sitting in a patch of flattened grass by the stream, maybe 20 feet from where I'd pitched the tent. The only strange thing, it was closed, but not the way I leave it. I always fold it up and make sure the knife is sheathed properly. When I picked it up, the small saw blade was still half out, bent just slightly at the tip. Looked like someone had tried to force it open or close without knowing how. I stared at it longer than I should have. Then I packed it, turned around, and headed back to where I'd planned to camp that night. Only I didn't make it far. The sun dropped too fast, and I didn't want to hike unfamiliar terrain in the dark. I figured I'd just pitch the tent again at the same stream site and leave early. Just one more night. I could keep a fire going and stay alert. I'd be fine. I wasn't. That night I skipped dinner. I built a fire early and kept it burning, feeding it from the pile of dry pine branches I'd gathered before dark. The night was still. No wind.
No owls.
Not even the usual buzz of bugs. I sat by the fire until well after midnight, just watching the woods. I thought I heard something once around 1 a.m., a soft crunching sound, too light to be a bear, maybe a raccoon or porcupine. It came from across the stream, but I couldn't see anything past the tree line. I stoked the fire again, then crawled into my tent without taking off my boots. I left my flashlight on next to me. I must have dozed off around 2. What woke me wasn't a noise. It was the light. The tent lit up like a flare had gone off outside. For a second, I thought maybe lightning had struck nearby, but it didn't fade the way lightning does. It glowed steady, like a lantern beam, only brighter. I sat up and reached for the zipper, but I didn't open it. I just listened. There were footsteps outside, slow, careful, one at a time, not heavy, but not trying to be quiet either. Just walking, crunching dried pine needles and old leaves. They circled my tent once, then again, then a third time. The light never moved. I was frozen. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, hunched, eyes fixed on the wall of the tent, watching the faint shadows shift every time something passed by the fire. I reached slowly into my backpack for the knife. My hands shook. The footsteps stopped right behind me, inches from the back wall of the tent. Then silence.
No breathing.
No movement. No crunch of leaves. Nothing. And the light went out. I waited. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe an hour. Couldn't tell. I didn't hear anything else. When I finally unzipped the tent, the fire was burned down to coals. Nothing else was there. I didn't sleep. When dawn broke, I packed everything and hiked out. I didn't follow the trail. I cut east toward the highway, bushwhacking through brush and skirting past deadfall. I checked my compass every few minutes, didn't stop for food or water, just kept walking until I saw blacktop and telephone poles. I flagged down a pickup around noon. The guy dropped me in Boulder. I didn't tell him what happened. I didn't even stop at the gas station to eat. I just sat behind the motel, staring at the mountains, until my phone had enough signal to book a flight home. I didn't report anything. What would I say? That someone shined a light outside my tent? That they circled it in the dark? I didn't have a name or a face, just the bent saw blade and the memory of footsteps. Months passed. I didn't camp again for nearly a year. I kept the knife in the backpack, but I never went back to Wyoming. Then, about 8 months later, I read something online. A hiker had gone missing east of New Fork Lake. Same area. His body was found 5 weeks later, about 2 miles from the stream. No signs of animal attack.
No gunshot.
Just dead. The article said they suspected exposure or a fall, but no gear was found. Just the body. His backpack, tent, stove gone. I looked at the date. It was 3 days after I left. I've thought about that a lot since. Wondered what would have happened if I hadn't gone back for the multi-tool, or if I'd opened the tent, or if I'd stayed a little longer the next morning. The truth is, I'll never know who was out there, or why. But I do know this. Someone watched me. Someone walked around my tent. Someone stood behind it, silent, waiting. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a monster. It was just a person. And that's what still scares me the most. It was early October 2019 when I decided to take a short camping trip to clear my head. I just turned 34. Things at work in Manchester had gotten loud, crowded, and tense, and my mind had been slipping into that fog I sometimes got when everything piles up at once. So I booked 4 days off, loaded my backpack with what I thought I'd need, and drove out to a quiet stretch of forest outside Fort William, up in the Scottish Highlands. It's the kind of place that doesn't get too many tourists, especially that time of year. Too wet, too cold, and a bit too isolated for most. Exactly why I picked it. I'd been to this general area once before in my 20s during a hiking trip. It was all long trails, steep ridges, and tree-lined valleys you could hike for hours without seeing a soul. This time, I wanted real solitude. I studied a few satellite maps and decided to aim for a small clearing about 6 miles into the woods from a forestry road that's not on many GPS apps. It looked flat enough to set up a tent and just far enough from any trails to give me silence. I told my brother I'd be out of signal, sent him a pin of where I was parking, and told him I'd be back by Sunday evening. If he didn't hear from me by Monday, he was to call someone. I set off Friday morning just after 6 a.m. and drove in darkness for most of the way. By the time I turned off the main road and found the logging track, it had started drizzling, but it wasn't bad yet. I parked by a bend where some old tire tracks showed others had done the same at some point. I slung my pack over my shoulder and started walking. No one around, no engine noises, no houses. Just a steady wind and the sound of damp leaves under my boots. It took a little over 2 hours to hike in, mostly uphill and across uneven terrain. It was a quiet, gray day, and the air smelled like wet pine needles and earth. I didn't see a single other person. The forest there is thick, mostly spruce and birch, but the clearing I'd picked out opened into a wide patch of low grass surrounded by trees on 3 sides and a mossy ridge on the 4th. Perfect place to camp. I got the tent up just after 11 a.m., checked my gear, boiled some water, and made a cup of tea. I didn't do much that first day, just walked the area, made notes in my little field book, and checked for any signs of animals or water pooling. It was peaceful. Not even birds that afternoon. I felt my mind slow down. That was what I wanted. That night, the wind picked up. I'd packed well enough for the cold, and the tent held its own. I was asleep by 10. Around 3 a.m., I woke up. There was no noise, nothing that startled me. I just woke. The tent was still. No wind, no rain. Completely silent. Now, I've been camping enough to know that silence in the woods isn't strange by itself. Sometimes everything just stops. But that kind of silence, where not even the smallest twig snaps or leaf rustles, that's different. I lay there on my back, eyes wide open, listening. I didn't hear anything. And then, after maybe a minute, I heard something. It was the sound of steps on the grass. Not heavy ones, just slow, deliberate steps. They weren't far, maybe 20 or 30 feet from the tent. They didn't sound like boots, more like soft shoes or even bare feet. But they were steady. 4 or 5 steps, then nothing, then 2 more. I didn't move. I didn't sit up. I just listened. Then they stopped entirely. I must have stayed frozen like that for another half hour. Nothing else moved. No animals. No people. I didn't have the nerve to unzip the tent and look. Eventually, I must have fallen back asleep from exhaustion or fear. In the morning, everything looked normal. I stepped outside, half expecting to see prints in the grass, but the ground was wet and soft all over, and if there had been any marks, the drizzle had wiped them clean. I walked the area for an hour, checking in wider and wider circles. Nothing out of the ordinary, just forest. By lunchtime, I'd convinced myself it had probably been a deer, maybe a fox. Maybe it wasn't even footsteps. Could have been dripping water. You hear things differently at night, I told myself. Still, I didn't sleep well that night. Saturday was quiet again. I cooked, wrote in my book, and took a long hike in a loop that brought me back to camp by mid-afternoon. The weather held steady, cold and cloudy, with bursts of wind strong enough to rattle the tent poles but no real rain. No people, no signs of anyone nearby. But that night, Saturday into Sunday, I woke up again. This time it was just after 2 a.m., and the sound was clearer. Footsteps. This time they came closer. I heard them from the edge of the clearing, same slow, cautious pace. I thought about calling out, but something about the way they moved felt wrong. They didn't walk straight toward the tent. They moved around it, clockwise, like whoever it was circling. Every few steps they'd pause, then start again. I sat up slowly. I had my flashlight next to my sleeping bag and a long camping knife I always bring, not for defense but for bushcraft. That night I held it tight. The footsteps circled the tent once, then twice, then stopped. They didn't leave. I just didn't hear them anymore. At some point, after nearly 2 hours of sitting completely still in the dark, I finally heard something again. A single footstep further away, then another, and another. It sounded like they were leaving, heading back into the trees. I stayed awake the rest of the night. I waited until dawn before unzipping the tent. I checked the area again. Nothing. No prints. No signs. But the dew in the grass was broken up all around the tent. It didn't look like animal movement. It was too wide and slow and spaced out. I didn't know what to make of it. By mid-morning, I'd packed up most of my gear. I didn't want to stay another night. I didn't care if it was some lost hiker, some messed up camper playing games, or just my mind twisting ordinary sounds into threats. I was done. I planned to hike back to the car slowly and get there before nightfall. I strapped on my pack, looked around one last time, and started walking. About 15 minutes into the hike back, I noticed something strange on a tree just off the main trail I'd used. It was a strip of cloth, gray torn, looked like a shirt sleeve. It was wrapped once around a tree branch about 6 feet up, tied into a loose knot. That's not something nature does on its own. I stopped walking and scanned the trees. The forest was quiet. I left the trail and walked a few feet over to it. It was definitely man-made, no doubt about it. I looked around again, no sign of anyone. I took it down and kept it just in case. I kept walking. Maybe an hour later, I heard something behind me. Not close, maybe 40 or 50 feet back. It sounded like another person's steps. I stopped. The steps stopped. I started walking again. So did they. This went on for another mile. Always the same. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved, they followed. I didn't run. Running in those woods with a full pack and no trail is how people twist ankles and die. But I didn't take my time anymore either. When I finally reached the forestry road and saw my car again, I didn't relax. I didn't stop. I just climbed in, started the engine, and drove. It wasn't until I was back on the main road heading south that I finally felt safe. I pulled into a petrol station outside Perth and sat in the car for half an hour before I even got out. I didn't tell anyone much about it for a long time. What would I say? Someone might have been following me in the woods? I hadn't seen anyone. I had no proof, just a scrap of cloth and some footsteps. But here's the part that still bothers me. A few months later, I was reading through a Scottish hiking forum, just browsing. One of the threads caught my eye. A user had posted about strange activity near Fort William. Said he'd gone camping solo near some old forestry roads. He never gave exact coordinates, but he mentioned a clearing near a moss-covered ridge. Said he'd heard footsteps at night. Said he thought he was being followed. He cut his trip short. That post was from September 2019, a month before I went. I checked the user's profile. That was his only post. Account never used again. I haven't gone camping alone since. I still have that torn strip of cloth. It's in my garage in a Ziploc bag. I don't know why I kept it. I guess I just want to know that it really happened, that I wasn't imagining it, because whoever or whatever was out there that night, they were real, and they were watching me. I was 34 when I took that solo hunting trip in the fall of 2016. I had time off work from the trucking company and needed to get away from everything. My marriage was dragging through a quiet collapse. The house always felt like a storm waiting to break, and I hadn't had a good hunt in over a year. I picked a spot I'd only ever scouted once, up in the southern part of Montana, just east of the Absaroka Range. Some locals called it Bitter Creek Ridge. It was remote, the kind of area where even the Forest Service didn't bother much. No cell reception for at least 20 miles. I liked it that way. The farther I got from people, the better I felt. I'd always been more at ease out there than I ever was around concrete and crowds. I loaded up my old Tacoma with a canvas tent, gear, food, and my .308. I left early on a Wednesday morning, clouds trailing over the range like smoke. The road thinned the deeper I went into the hills, and by the time I reached the logging trail near Bitter Creek, it had turned into gravel and then dirt. It was late afternoon when I parked the truck in a little clearing, barely wide enough to turn around in. I hiked another 2 miles from there, straight up a ridge trail I'd marked on a map years ago, one I remembered for its elk sign and open sight lines. The forest up that way was dense with lodgepole pine and aspen. The ground was soft and clean from the early fall drop. I set up camp near a slope, just above a draw where water still trickled under rocks. I remember feeling good that first night. There's a quiet you get out there that presses into your skull, makes you feel like you're breathing for the first time in weeks. I sat by the fire and boiled some coffee, watched the smoke slip between the trees. I didn't see any game that night, but I did hear something. Branches snapping uphill, deliberate, heavy steps. Could have been elk, could have been a black bear. Didn't matter to me either way. I was where I needed to be. I slept light that night, like I always do in the woods. I woke up a few times, listening. A breeze cut through around 3 a.m., and something about it put me on edge. I kept my rifle beside me in the tent, safety on but loaded. Morning came cold and gray. I tracked northeast toward the ridge, where I'd seen sign before. About a mile in, I found fresh scat elk, big bull judging by the size. I slowed my pace, stepped light, ears up. That's when I found the tracks. Hoof prints, fresh, moving down from higher up. I followed them for another hour, pushing through brush, stopping every few minutes to scan. Nothing. Around noon, I stopped near a game trail to eat. The wind had picked up and clouds were curling over the peaks, looking like they might spit rain. I was about to move on when I heard a sound that wasn't wind. Not an animal sound either. It was a thud deep and short, like something solid hitting earth. I froze. I waited, crouched, for 5 minutes, then 10. Nothing. I started moving toward where I thought it came from, about 150 yards east, staying off the trail and moving slow. That's when I found the first tree. It had been cut, not fallen, cut clean across with an axe or a saw. But there weren't any stumps or branches lying around. It was propped up between two trees almost placed. I walked around it, thinking maybe some logger had come through, or maybe hunters marking their way. But there were no boot prints,
No trash. No gear marks.
just that tree. It unsettled me. I don't spook easy in the woods, but something about it felt wrong. I made my way back to camp slowly, watching the tree line more than I watched the trail. I didn't hunt that evening. I stayed close to camp, cleaned my rifle, and boiled water for some freeze-dried beef stew. As I sat by the fire, I couldn't stop thinking about that sound and that cut tree. It didn't make sense. That night, I kept the fire going longer than usual. Around midnight, I heard movement again, heavier than before. This time it was close, 50 yards, maybe less. I stepped out of the tent, rifle in hand. The firelight didn't reach far, but I scanned the edge of the trees.
No yesine. No breathing sounds.
Then, just before I went back inside, I caught something strange in the dirt near the fire ring. A track, not animal, not boot either. Barefoot, human, but wide, broad, and fresh. I didn't sleep after that. I stayed in the tent with the rifle across my chest, ears sharp. At some point around 4 a.m., I heard a soft knock, like wood on wood. A single tap, then silence. At first light, I packed up and hiked in the direction of the track. I found more of them, big feet.
Bore. No tread. No sacks.
No sign of any campsite or gear, just tracks weaving through brush and looping around my own path from the day before. Like someone had been following me, watching. I didn't say it out loud. Not that there was anyone to hear, but I knew I wasn't alone up there. And whoever else was, they weren't camping. They weren't hiking. They weren't hunting. They were doing something else. I moved deeper into the ridge that day, partly to scout, mostly to get away from the tracks. Around noon, fog rolled in.
Dense. Wet.
Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. I was forced to stay put for an hour. I sat under a pine outcrop and ate jerky, listening to the forest go quiet again. Too quiet. Even birds had shut up. That's when I saw something move across the trail. Just a shape. A tall shape, maybe 2 body lengths away. I raised my rifle but didn't fire. It didn't come closer. It just stood there. Then it slipped off into the trees like smoke. I hiked back to camp faster than I should have. My knees were shaking by the time I reached the tent. I didn't see anything else that day, but I felt eyes on me. The kind of stare you don't imagine. The kind that prickles your neck. I almost packed up right then and there, but night was coming and I didn't want to stumble down that ridge in the dark. I didn't start a fire that night. I didn't eat. I just sat inside the tent with the rifle loaded and both eyes open. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps. Not animal. Crunch, crunch, slow and deliberate. They circled the tent. Once, twice, then silence. Then I heard breathing. Close, right outside the tent wall. Low, heavy, human breathing. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just waited. After what felt like forever, the breathing stopped. I stayed frozen until dawn. When the sun finally rose, I stepped outside, rifle up. No one was there, but they'd been there. I found more tracks, same bare feet. This time they led straight to the tent, then back into the woods. And next to the fire pit, something had been left. A single elk antler. Clean, dry, not from any animal I'd seen recently. It had been placed, not dropped. That was enough for me. I packed up in under 10 minutes and started hiking down. No food.
No coffee.
Just gear and gun. Every half mile I stopped and listened. Nothing but wind and crows. I reached the truck just after noon. I didn't look back. On the drive home, I tried to make sense of it. Could have been some backwoods squatter, a mountain man, or maybe someone who lived off the grid and didn't want company. But it wasn't just that they were there, it was how they moved. The way they never spoke. The way they watched, left things, followed. I don't know. I've hunted all my life. I've tracked animals through storms, camped alone in the wildest places. But that ridge didn't feel right. I never went back. I don't talk about it much. When people ask why I stopped hunting solo, I say I just got too busy, that I don't have the time. But the truth is, I've been in wild country all over this state. Only once have I felt like I didn't belong. That ridge, Bitter Creek, it's not on most maps. No traios, no local towers, no cabins. Just endless trees and whatever's up there watching the people who wander too far. And I won't be one of them again. It was early November of 2013 when I decided to take a short break from everything. I was 32 at the time, working long hours in a car parts warehouse in Manchester. Everything felt like it was closing in. Same routine, same streets, same faces. I wasn't trying to run from anything, really. I just needed silence. Not the kind you get from headphones or locked doors, but actual silence, thick, remote, and far from human noise. I had an old rust-colored Toyota Hilux I'd bought cheap 2 years prior. It rattled like hell and had a cracked left mirror I never bothered fixing. I packed it with the basics: a weatherproof tent, an old army sleeping bag, a cast iron pan, a few cans of beans, a hand-cranked flashlight, and a couple of dry changes of clothes. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I figured I'd be back in 2 days. I chose Galloway Forest Park in southern Scotland. It's remote, massive, and quiet. Thousands of acres of hills, pines, rivers, and trails, many of which rarely see a boot print. I'd been there once years ago with an old friend during spring. I remembered a path that veered off deeper into the forest where the trees leaned heavy and close. That's where I wanted to be. I arrived just past noon after 5 hours of slow driving on rain-slick roads. The sky was already gray, low clouds clinging to the tree lines. I parked the truck off a gravel road by a small overgrown lay-by, slung my backpack over my shoulder, and started walking. The forest swallowed me almost instantly. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Even the birds seemed absent. The only sound was the crunch of my boots on wet leaves and the occasional drip from high branches. I walked about 4 miles in before I found a small clearing surrounded by tall spruce trees, the kind that barely move even in heavy wind. The ground was mostly flat with a layer of pine needles thick enough to soften a step. I pitched the tent in the center and set up a small fire pit. I gathered what dry wood I could, which wasn't much. The rain had come earlier in the week, soaking everything. I had brought some fire starter cubes just in case, so I used one to get a flame going. It was small, flickering, but it gave me enough heat to boil water for some instant noodles. Around 4 p.m., the sky started to darken. I pulled the tent flap down and sat just under it, watching the forest turn into silhouettes. Then came the rain. At first, it was light, tapping on the tent like fingers. But by nightfall, it thickened to a steady, rhythmic drumming. Water gathered on the tent roof, sagging the canvas slightly. I adjusted the guy lines, reinforced a few knots, and crawled into my sleeping bag. The sound of the rain against the nylon was oddly soothing. I dozed off just after 8 p.m. sometime later. I don't know the exact time. I woke up, not from a nightmare or a cold draft, but from silence. The rain had stopped. Complete silence in a forest isn't normal. Even in the dead of night, you hear something. Wind in the trees, insects, an owl, a rustle of something moving. But this was different. The kind of silence that feels like it's pressing against your ears. I sat up slowly, my heart already beating faster than it should have been. I unzipped the tent door just a crack and looked out. The trees stood motionless. The fire had long gone out, leaving only the blackened ring of stones. The clouds above were thick enough to blot out any moonlight, making everything look like a solid wall of darkness. I listened for maybe 10 minutes. Still nothing. Then I heard it. A sharp snap. Not a branch falling from high up or a tree groaning in the wind. This was a footstep, a single definite step about 30 or 40 feet away. I froze. My ears were ringing with blood. I closed the tent flap slowly and reached into the side pouch of my bag where I kept a small folding knife. It wasn't much. I had it more for cutting cord or peeling fruit, but it felt heavier in my hand now. I didn't move. I just sat there, holding the knife close to my chest, straining to hear anything else. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer, but deer don't usually take single steps and then go quiet. They skitter, they dart, they rustle through underbrush. This was something with intention. More time passed, maybe 20 minutes. Then another sound, this one closer. Not a step this time, but the soft, unmistakable shift of a wet boot on pine needles. My scalp tingled. I felt cold sweat run down my back. I pressed my hand against the floor of the tent, feeling for vibrations. There were none. I needed to see. Slowly, I reached for the flashlight. It was on the opposite side of the tent, next to my rolled-up jacket. Every movement felt louder than it was. My fingers finally wrapped around the plastic handle. I didn't turn it on. Not yet. I unzipped the tent again, an inch at a time. The metal teeth sounded like they were screaming in the quiet. I poked the flashlight out first and clicked it on. Nothing, just trees and mist. But then the beam landed on something small and unnatural. It was a footprint, not mine, not even close. My boots were thick-soled with deep tread. This was a flat-soled shoe, maybe a trainer, pressed into the mud just outside the clearing. I swept the light in every direction. My hands were shaking, still nothing, but I knew I wasn't alone. I clicked the flashlight off, zipped the tent, and lay back down, knife still gripped tight. I kept my ears open, straining for the smallest sound. It was hours before I heard anything else. This time it was a long, drawn-out scrape, like someone dragging a stick or something heavier across bark. Then silence again. I didn't sleep. By morning, the rain had returned, lighter, steadier. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The forest looked different in the gray light. Everything glistened with wetness. I walked straight to where I had seen the footprint. It was gone. Not washed away, gone. Smoothed over, like someone had intentionally brushed it with a branch. I looked around for more prints but found nothing. Just damp needles and scattered leaves. I packed quickly. My hands were clumsy. I didn't even bother with breakfast. The walk back felt longer. Every tree looked like it was hiding something. I kept turning around, expecting to see someone standing on the trail behind me. When I reached the truck, I threw my gear into the back and started the engine without checking a thing. I drove straight home, didn't stop once. Back in Manchester, I didn't tell anyone what happened. I didn't know what to say. There was no face, no voice, no confrontation. Just quiet footsteps and signs that I wasn't alone. 2 weeks later, I looked up the area online. Nothing unusual. No reports, no missing persons, no recent crimes. Just another forgotten stretch of woods. I still go camping now and then, but I stay close to marked trails. I stick to places where other people go, where I can hear traffic in the distance or see the glow of nearby towns. I haven't gone back to Galloway. What scared me most wasn't that someone was out there that night. It was that they didn't want to be seen. They were just watching, and I'll never know why. It was late September 2013, the tail end of the camping season, when the days were still just warm enough to enjoy, but the nights dropped into that damp, bone-chilling cold that crept into your sleeping bag no matter how thick it was. I was 32 then, still living in Manchester, and working full-time in a logistics warehouse. My time off was rare, and when I did get a chance to leave the city, I usually took it. I wasn't married, didn't have any kids. Most of my mates were tied up with their own families, so I'd gotten used to doing things on my own. I didn't mind it much. I found a certain peace in the quiet of being somewhere far away from everyone. That year, I'd planned to hike a section of the Pennine Way, but my ankle had been acting up again since spring. An old football injury that never really healed right. Instead of pushing it, I decided to take a slower trip, more of a rest than a challenge. A long weekend of solo camping in the North York Moors sounded just right. I'd been there twice before. I knew a spot near a disused sheepfold that was far enough off the trail to avoid most walkers, but flat and clear enough for a tent. The area around it dipped slightly, surrounded by bracken and thick trees, the kind of place that felt hidden but not suffocating. I set out on a Friday morning, driving the 3 hours from Manchester to a gravel levee near the village of Rosedale Abbey. From there, I loaded up my pack and hiked in. It was only about 3.5 miles to where I planned to camp, but it felt longer with the extra weight on my back. I didn't bring much, just the essentials: tent, sleeping bag, stove, canned food, a knife, and a few tools. I had my phone too, but reception was patchy in the hills, so I never relied on it. By early afternoon, I reached the spot. Nothing had changed since the last time I was there. The old stone walls of the sheepfold were still crumbled at the edges, moss creeping over them like green veins. The trees beyond had turned slightly yellow with the season, and the air carried that earthy, sharp smell of dried bracken and decaying leaves. I set up my tent, cooked some beans on the little gas stove, and drank a bottle of ale I'd brought along. I sat there in my camp chair with a fleece on, watching the light dip behind the trees. It felt like a place outside of time, quiet and slow and still. I remember thinking that I might not see another soul the entire weekend. I was wrong. The first night was uneventful, cold as expected. I kept waking up, more from the damp chill than any noise, but I didn't feel uneasy. It was just typical for camping that time of year. I woke up stiff, but the sky was clear and bright. After a quick breakfast and some coffee, I set off on a small walk. Nothing heavy, just stretching the legs, following some of the old sheep tracks into the woods, then back. I didn't see anyone all day. It wasn't until that evening that I felt something shift. I was sat by my tent again, just past 6, boiling water for noodles. The sun had dipped behind the ridge, but there was still some light bleeding across the sky. I wasn't doing much, just staring at the trees, listening to the wind in the branches. That was when I saw him. At first, I thought I'd imagined it, just movement at the corner of my eye. But then I looked up properly, and I saw a man standing about 40 feet away, half hidden between 2 trees. He wasn't walking or passing through. He was just standing there, perfectly still. I couldn't see much of him. He was in shadow. He had a dark coat on, something long and heavy, and I remember thinking he looked too bundled up for the temperature. His face was partly in shade, but I could tell he was staring directly at me. I just sat there, frozen, not scared, not yet, just confused. I didn't wave or call out. I didn't want to. Something about the way he stood there, it wasn't right. He didn't move. Not when I looked at him. Not when I stood up slowly. He didn't come forward or back. He just stayed there, like he was waiting for something. After maybe 10 seconds, I looked down just for a moment, just long enough to pick up my torch. When I looked back, he was gone. I didn't hear him walk away. No footsteps. No sound of movement through the undergrowth. Just gone. The next 2 hours felt different. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. No birdsong, no distant sheep calls. Nothing. I stayed outside for a bit longer, trying to act like nothing had happened, but my skin felt tight and cold, like my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept hearing noises, small cracks and rustles, faint shifts in the undergrowth. At one point, around 2 in the morning, I thought I heard footsteps. Not an animal. Too slow, too deliberate. I sat up in the tent, holding my knife in one hand, the torch in the other, but I didn't go out. The noise didn't come closer, but it didn't leave either. It was like someone was walking just outside the reach of my light, staying out of sight on purpose. By morning, I was exhausted. The sky was gray, and a light mist hung low over the bracken. Everything felt damp and wrong. I boiled some coffee, but I couldn't eat much. My stomach was in knots. I kept scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. I told myself it was probably just another hiker, maybe someone with land nearby. But the way he looked at me, the way he vanished, it didn't fit. Still, I tried to shake it off. I went for another walk, shorter this time, sticking close to camp. I didn't see him again that day, but I found something. Near a gnarled tree about 10 minutes from my tent, I noticed disturbed earth. Not fresh, not a hole or anything, just a patch where the leaves had been swept aside. On top of the soil was a small pile of stones, neatly arranged, like a marker. It looked deliberate. I didn't touch it. The third night was worse than the second. I planned to pack up in the morning anyway, but I didn't want to wait. I went to bed early, hoping to sleep through until dawn and get out at first light. No such luck. At around midnight, I woke up to the sound of breathing. Not mine. It was coming from just outside the tent. Shallow, slow breaths, like someone crouched low, trying to stay quiet. I didn't move. I didn't even open my eyes all the way. I just lay there, barely breathing, listening. It went on for minutes. The breathing would stop, then start again. I thought I heard fabric brushing against the nylon of the tent. At one point, it felt like a hand pressed softly against the outer wall, just above my shoulder. Not hard, just enough to test it. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. Eventually, the breathing stopped. I waited another hour before I unzipped the tent just a crack and peeked out. Nothing. No movement. But I saw something that hadn't been there before. Hanging from the branch of a low tree, maybe 15 feet away, was a length of string. Tied at the end was a small bundle, twigs, some leaves, and a scrap of fabric, like a charm or a sign, or a warning. I didn't go back to sleep. I sat there with the knife in my hand, waiting for the sky to lighten. At the first sign of dawn, I packed up everything as fast as I could. Tent, stove, sleeping bag, jammed it all into the pack with no care for the order. I didn't eat, didn't drink. I just wanted out. I hiked the same way I came in, trying not to run. The mist was thick, and I kept turning around, convinced I'd see him again. But I didn't. Not until I reached the trailhead near the levee. That's when I saw him again, across the field, standing on the edge of the trees. Same coat, same stillness. He was watching me. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. I got in the car and drove. I didn't stop until I hit the A64, back toward York. Only then did I feel my heart slow down. When I got home, I unpacked everything in the bright safety of my flat. Everything was there. Nothing missing. Nothing damaged. But that scrap of fabric, the one tied to the twig bundle, I found it stuffed in the side pocket of my pack. I never put it there. I threw it away. Burned it, actually. Took it out to the edge of a friend's property in Cheshire and burned it in a metal bin. I haven't camped alone since. I reported the incident to the local police in North Yorkshire, just to be safe. They didn't find anything. No reports of missing people, no evidence of trespass, nothing suspicious in the area. They told me it was probably just a local or a landowner keeping an eye on their property. Maybe they were right, but the way he moved or didn't move, the silence, the breathing, the charm in the tree, it didn't feel like a random encounter. It felt planned. I've gone hiking since. I still love the hills and the moors, but I always go with someone now. I don't camp alone, and I never go back to that spot. not after seeing him, because I know deep down that man wasn't just passing through. He was waiting and watching, and I think if I'd stayed one more night, I wouldn't have come back.